You know what used to keep me up at night? This constant gnawing fear of what was going to happen if I ever fell behind in my debt payments. I was started working like these brutal 60-hour weeks, driving for every delivery app and rideshare service that I could find, just desperately trying to stay current on my credit cards. Because in my mind, falling behind meant getting sued, and getting sued kind of felt like financial game over. Court is scary, right? I don't want to go to court. Felt like that was going to be the worst thing in the world. So I worked really, really hard to avoid that. But here's the thing, secret time here. There's actually a solution that I didn't even know existed. Settling my credit card debt. Settling is this process where you can negotiate your creditors to pay less than what you actually owe them, often a lot less, and get your account closed as paid. Now, when I think about all those hours behind the wheel just trying to keep up with minimum payments, I can't help but wonder, how would my life have been different had I known about debt settlement at the time, or known that it was, a feasible thing? Because I did actually know about it, but it just seemed crazy. So that's why today's episode is all about debt settlement. But more importantly, it's about helping you figure out if debt settlement is the right solution for your situation. I'll walk you through 6 essential tips for settlement. And first, though, before we get into it, because I know settlement sounds great, here's the truth. Settlement isn't right for everybody. Sometimes bankruptcy is actually a better path, and sometimes debt management plans make more sense. What matters is finding the option that fits your specific situation. Hey, everybody, I'm Ben. I'm the co-founder of Upsolve, and welcome to another episode of the Break Free podcast. This is the show where we get real about money stuff. No more sugarcoating, just honest talk about breaking free from financial stress and building the life that you deserve. Quick disclaimer as always before we dive in, while I've been through debt and I even went to law school because of it, I'm not your attorney or financial advisor. You can think of me more like the friend who learned things the hard way and wants to help you avoid the same pitfalls that, I struggled with. For any specific advice about your situation, definitely talk to a professional. Now, in the last episode of Break Free, we talked about something pretty cool, which is how I managed to get a mortgage after I filed bankruptcy and buy the house that you see me in right here. I promise it's more than just this room. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into settlement, which is a powerful tool for debt relief for some people, but definitely not for everybody. And understanding if settlement is right for you can be tricky, which is exactly why we built a free tool at upsolve.org that helps you understand all of your debt relief options. And I want to show you that now. Okay, so my apologies to those of you who are just listening to this, but for those of you who are watching it on YouTube, Spotify, or somewhere else, you'll be able to see me over at upsolve.org here. For those who don't know, Upsolve is a nonprofit. We help people break free from debt, and we do that for free. So if you head over to upsolve.org and you click on this Get Debt Help option, you're going to launch a quick screener. It only takes about 2 minutes to complete. I'm going to do it real quickly here. We're going to say that I have $10,000 in debt. There we go. We're going to say only one person in my household. We're going to say, yes, I receive monthly income. No, it's not more than that. I can afford to pay, let's say $200 is what I have to pay towards my debts each month. I don't have that higher credit score. And it's going to then show me the debt relief options available. And it's also going to importantly show me what would happen if I just tried to keep making the payments that I've been making. In this instance, the only thing that's going to make sense for me is bankruptcy. I wouldn't be somebody that settlement would make sense for because I am not making big payments. I don't necessarily have a lot of money. And so it's going to be tricky to settlement. Now, I would encourage you, if you've never done this, take a look at that Upsolve tool. It is 100% free. If you are somebody whom debt management fits for, we can help you get connected to a credit counseling agency. Debt settlement, which is this negotiate debt option here, we can help you learn how to settle your debt, which is what we're discussing in this episode. And then if you're somebody who needs to consolidate their debt into a debt consolidation loan, if you have a higher credit score and can get a lower rate, we can explain that process to you here. And ultimately, if you want to file bankruptcy like I did, you can learn more about it and you can actually get started with Upsolve's free tool right there. So again, learning more about settlement, like I said, it can be tricky to know if it's right for you, and our tool can help you figure that out for free. So I encourage you to check it out before we dive deeper into debt settlement. But don't leave. You can do it while this is playing in the background. So we talked about what debt settlement is, but I just want to iterate again. It's a process that you can use to pay less than you owe. Now, one thing I want to be really clear on is that there's a lot of misinformation about this online, a whole lot of misinformation. I see people all the time saying, if you have a debt collector calling you, you don't have to pay them, or you're only ever going to have to pay pennies on the dollar. That can be true, right? There's definitely some people that pay, few cents on the dollar, 10% of what they owe. But it's not always going to be that amazing. It can be great. You can definitely get reductions in your total payments, and we'll talk about the expected amounts that you should see, but it's often overblown by people who are trying to sell you something. So make sure you kind of take what they're saying online about it with a grain of salt. Settlements, I feel like, is like the internet's favorite version of debt relief. That's the thing we talk about on social media all the time. And the conversation is not always right, which is why we made this article that I am going to show you here in a second on the Upsolve website. I definitely encourage you to take a look at it. We'll be walking through some of the tips in there, and also why we made this video. So here's the thing about settlement, right? Like, it sounds crazy. When I was driving around in my car trying to make ends meet, I heard about it on like an Instagram Live or something, and it sounded insane to me, right? Like, why in the world would somebody that I owe $60,000 to, which was what was going on with me, take $5,000? That seems nuts. And they probably wouldn't take $5,000, but they usually will take less than you actually owe them. And the reason is pretty simple. They expect, especially if you're behind, that they're not going to get anything from you, and they'd rather get something than nothing. That is why settlement can be powerful. Now, when you choose to settle debt, remember that timing is everything. Most people don't realize there's actually a window of opportunity for debt settlement. Credit card companies typically don't sell your debt to debt collectors or start considering legal action at all. Gosh, I wish I had known this. I thought it was going to be like the day I missed a payment. But they usually don't consider legal action at all until you're about 6 months behind on your payments. And then usually they'll sell your debt to a collection agency when you're between 6 and 8 months behind. And then lawsuits often come after you've been behind for about a year. Now, the best time to settle is there's not really a best time, but it's generally speaking safer to settle before your debt gets sold to collectors, usually when you're 3 to 5 months behind. And there's sort of like two periods. There's the period before the original creditor sells it to a debt collector, and there's a period before the debt collector sues you. Usually debt lawsuits are between a debt collector and you, not the original creditor like Bank of America, Chase, or you. Sometimes original creditors will sue you, but usually if you're talking debt lawsuits, it's a debt collector. So in that first window, right, like when you owe, let's say, Bank of America money, so there will be like a sweet spot right before they sell to a debt collector to, say this is bad debt, they write it off on their taxes. And that's about the like 3 to 5 month mark where they're going to accept the lowest repayment offer from you. And then again, there's another sweet spot once they sell it to a debt collector, because what typically happens is Bank of America sells it to a debt collector. The debt collector then says, hey, this is a $10,000 debt. I'm going to try to get $10,000, whereas Bank of America might have accepted less right before they sold it. But that the debt collector will sort of take like less and less the longer that they have that debt. There's no like hard and fast rules for this, but that's kind of generally what you see up until the point that they ultimately sue you, in which case, like, they have a bunch of leverage, right? Because you're in court now. So there's those two windows right there. And the important thing to remember is not to wait too long because, like I said, when it goes from Bank of America to a debt collector, usually the price goes up. And then when it goes from the debt collector to a lawsuit, usually the price goes up there as well. But, like I said, waiting a little bit longer can help you to pay less. So do what you're comfortable with. Ultimately, like, I've seen people successfully settle debt at various stages of the collection process, but earlier, like at least earlier in that window before they sell is definitely better. Ideally before the 6 month mark when credit card companies will usually sell it to a collector. Now, understanding this timeline could mean the difference between a successful settlement and missing your chance. And the Upsolve article that I have up on my screen here, and it's linked in the show notes, will help you understand the most effective time to offer settlements. Make sure you take a look at it. Now, let's talk about who a settlement typically works for, right? Because as I mentioned, they're not for everybody. So settlements might be right for you if the following are true. 1, you have a decent chunk of money saved up, or you could save up a lump sum. 2, your debts are mainly credit cards or other unsecured debt. Unsecured meaning it's not tied to property. Secured would be like a car or a house. 3, you're falling behind in your payments or seeing that you might soon. Because if you're not falling behind, right, you've been making your payments, why the heck would a bank take a settlement offer? They're going to say, well, just keep making your payments. I don't want to take less. So you have to actually be falling behind or about to fall behind for this to really make sense for you. Four, you might want to avoid bankruptcy. If you think the only option for you that isn't bankruptcy is to try to settle it, and you don't want to think about bankruptcy, I understand that. I think a lot of people feel that way. And settlement could be a good possibility for you, assuming that you have cash to use for that payment. Five, if you can handle a temporary hit to your credit score, then, because you will have a hit to your credit score when you settle, then maybe settlement is a good option for you. Now, the important thing for settlement is really honestly that you have enough money to do it, right? Because you're generally going to have to make a lump sum payment. Some instances you can end up on a payment plan, but you need some money, and you're going to need more money almost always than what you were currently paying for your monthly payment. If you don't have that, settlement is generally off the table. So let's talk about the other situations where settlement might not make sense. So if you are being sued right now, then bankruptcy might be a better option. And also you might need to, deal with the lawsuit, file an answer, which we'll talk about in a second, before you do a settlement. So if you're being sued right now, bankruptcy, like I mentioned, could be a better option for you because it might block that lawsuit depending upon what stage it's in. The second instance, I mentioned this already, is when you just can't get the money. The third is when you need to maintain a high credit score for work or housing. And the fourth is if you could afford a debt management plan with lower interest rates, because sometimes that will ultimately actually end up with you paying less over time than what your settlement amount would have been. Now, if you think settlement might be right for you, then great. Here are 6 key tips for anybody who's considering it. I'm going to have them up here on the screen as well. The first is to remember, the bank wants to negotiate with you, right? They really, really, really don't want to end up getting nothing for this. And so they're motivated to take less than what you owe. When you call them, have that in mind, be kind to them. The people that are on the phone with you are not necessarily, your enemies, right? They're just like you. They're working a job that they need to pay their family. And, often they're willing to negotiate with you. And if you're kind to them, they'll often be kind to you. Number 2, do your research with this whole process. Make sure you understand debt settlement and the pros and cons of debt settlement before you decide to make an offer to the bank. Now, I don't know if I made this clear earlier, but to do debt settlement, you're going to have to call your bank or your debt collector. In most cases, there are some instances where you can do this remotely, but usually you need to contact them. And that can be a little bit scary. And understanding what the process is definitely helps make it less scary for you when you ultimately call them. So understand the process, make sure you know what's going on, understand the statute of limitations. There's more context on this in the article, but basically there's a time window where people can and can't sue you for debt. And understanding when that is will help you understand how risky your situation is. Because if you're getting close to that statute of limitations and you're holding out for a better deal, it's can be playing with fire, right? Because most debt collectors, or, if it's still with a creditor, most of the time they're going to want to sue you before that runs out. Because if it runs out, generally speaking, they can't sue you. It's been too long. And so that's where you start to get in a tricky situation. You can learn more about that in the Upsolve article linked in the show notes. Now, understand your numbers. You need to know how much you can actually put towards a settlement, right? If you don't have, if let's say you owe $10,000 and you've got $100 in the bank, probably not going to be a successful settlement. But if what you could pay, right, you owe $10,000, you could pay $5,000, but you want to pay $4,000, go into negotiation knowing those things, because it'll make you better able to be firm as you're responding to the person that you're speaking with, and keep you from paying more than you're comfortable with. Also, decide first before you go into this, is settlement actually going to be the best option for you? For some people, it's not. And you're going to want to do your research ahead of time to know that. Okay, number 3, negotiate the settlement. This is when you're actually on the phone with the debt collector or the bank asking to pay them less. So you should expect a couple rounds. I know the article says 2. I've seen people go back and forth 5, 6 times, calling, not getting what they want, calling again. But you should expect a couple rounds of negotiations before you land on something that you're comfortable with. Most call centers, banks, and debt collectors are coached not to accept your first offer. So often it's a good idea to hang up if you don't get what you want and call back again later. Now, it can be risky to do that, right? As I mentioned, if you're getting close to the statute of limitations, which is the date when they can't really sue you anymore for the debt, It can be risky to hang up and call because maybe you get sued tomorrow. It can also be risky if it's like right before the bank is going to send it to the debt collector. So know where you're at in that whole process, the whole timeline before you hang up. But if you've got ample time, if there's no lawsuit being threatened, often there's no harm in hanging up, calling back the next day. And if you don't get what you want then, as long as you still have a good amount of time, like hang up and call again the next day. And, as I mentioned, like you'll usually get your best results after a few different calls. So don't be afraid to ask for what you want and be firm, but don't wait too long either. Now, tip number 4, like if you do get court papers, right? Like if there is a lawsuit going on, don't ignore those papers. I want to say that again, like don't ignore those papers. Lawsuits are important, right? Like even if you ultimately settle, there's a legal process that if you don't follow, you could end up really in trouble. One thing that you have to do whenever you get sued is you have to file something called an answer, which is basically where you take what the person suing you sent you and you file something with the court that says, here's my response to this. And there's a legal process for that. Like I said, I'm not appearing here as your lawyer. This is not legal advice. But what can happen if you don't do that, if you never file an answer, is you can end up with what's called a default judgment, where the judge just says, this person didn't show up, didn't say anything in this lawsuit. I'm just deciding that the creditor, the debt collector, whoever it is, wins this lawsuit. And that can really stink, right? Because like maybe the debt wasn't even yours and you're being sued for it. You just didn't file an answer and now you lost the case. That can be expensive, take a lot of time and energy, give you a lot of stress. And so if you get sued, don't ignore those court papers. Do what they tell you to do. Make sure you get that answer in. And if you have questions, you're confused, contact the court clerk. There'll usually be contact information on the thing that you get when you're sued. Ask them what you need to do, or contact a local lawyer or legal aid office. You can find more of those on Upsolve. Actually, in our tool, we help make referrals to bankruptcy attorneys for free evaluations, if that's something that might be helpful to you. Okay, so number 5, accept that you can't win them all, right? Like you might not be able to get your bank or the collection company to move on anything. And if you can't, that's okay, right? Like you tried. You can have pride knowing that you tried. And if you're somebody like me, right, like had I tried to do this and, even not been successful in it, it probably would have made me feel better, like about filing bankruptcy early on because, I tried to pay something. I tried to pay what I could. And so now something like bankruptcy seems like, okay, great. I did what I thought I needed to do. Let's go ahead and file bankruptcy. Now, number 6, be sure to watch out for third-party debt settlement scams. Oh my goodness. Settlement can seem scary. I know I thought it was scary when I was dealing with my debt. And there are so many sharks out there who are just like circling the waters of debt, looking for people that are struggling and who will promise you the world and deliver very little. And then you're like, where the heck did my money that I paid you go? What was it for? Be careful in this space. Really do your research to say, is the person who's offering this to me offering what they're saying they're going to give me? Do they have good Google reviews? What do they look like on the Better Business Bureau? And one warning sign is if somebody charges you something before they even get your settlement accepted, because that's money you'll never get back. And you might not actually get your debt settled for less than you owe. Now you're out, all the money that you paid to whoever this person was. And now you're also still in the same position you were in before. So if you hear somebody saying, great, pay me first, that should raise some red flags. Unless, you look at their reviews and they have thousands and thousands of great reviews or something like that, or they come highly recommended from a friend. But just be careful. There are a lot of scams out there in this space. Okay, so those are our 6 tips. Watch out for scams, except you can't win them all. Don't ignore court papers. Negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. If first you don't succeed, hang up, try again, as long as you have time. Do research so you understand the process. And remember, this is something that the banks ultimately want. They would rather get something from you than nothing, and suing you is a hassle. They would rather not do it if they don't have to. Take a look at this article if you want more information, but those are 6 tips that will help you with the settlement process if you decide the settlement process is right for you. Now, settlement, even if you do decide that it's right for you, maybe you don't want to do it on your own because, after all, who wants to call their creditors and negotiate? If that sounds intimidating, you're not alone. And there are companies out there who are reputable who can help. And one of them that a lot of Upsolve users end up working with when they decide settlement's the right thing for them is a company called Solo. You might have heard of them in the past on YouTube or somewhere as a company called Solo Suit. They changed their name to Solo recently. And Solo are experts at negotiating settlements. They've helped thousands of people since 2018, and they can do a lot for you. They can handle all your communication with your creditors or debt collectors. They can negotiate settlements that actually work for your budget. They can make sure everything is properly documented, and they can guide you through the whole process. Now, they also can help you reply to debt lawsuits. You see that option right here on their website. And so that can be something, if you're concerned about that process, you just can't get an answer about how to file an answer. That's something Solo can help with as well. Now, they're not a nonprofit. They do charge for their services. I think, generally speaking, the rates are pretty reasonable. I wouldn't work with them if I didn't think that was the case, because obviously Upsolve is a free service. We're a nonprofit. We're very interested in helping you for free because we believe that the legal system should work for everybody. But Solo, as a referral partner, I think they do pretty good work and that they have reasonable rates. If you do need to work with somebody for free, you can check out the links to lawyers that we have all over our website. We can help you get connected to somebody who can give you an evaluation for that sort of service for free in many instances. Now, full transparency, if you use our link in the show notes down below to sign up with Solo, Upsolve does get a small commission, and that helps us keep providing free education and resources to you. Now, whether you go with settlements or debt management or bankruptcy, whatever it is, what I really want you to understand is that you have options. When I was working those 60-hour weeks, driving for every delivery app under the sun just to make my minimum payments, I felt trapped because I thought that was the only thing I could do. But there's usually a way forward. Sometimes it's settlement, sometimes it's bankruptcy, and sometimes it's a debt management plan. Other times it's just doing your budget a little bit differently. What matters ultimately is that you find the right path for you. And as I mentioned earlier, that's exactly why we built our free screener tool at upsolve.org, so that you could go through and see what makes sense for you instead of just what you happen to hear somebody on Instagram Live talking about. There's many options out there other than killing yourself like I was doing, just to grind away night after night after day after day after day. You don't have to do that. There are things that you can do to break free from your debt and move forward. So maybe that's settlement, and now you understand a little bit more about how settlement works. Now, if you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe. We actually have new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that drop at 5 a.m. Eastern Time. We also have a webinar every Monday night. We just had one we're going to have one tonight, actually. What day is it? Oh my goodness. We're going to have another one tonight. We had one last week. It was awesome. A lot of people showed up to it, asked great questions. This is a chance to ask experts and ask me questions that you have about debt relief, about bankruptcy, debt management, settlement, etc., and get those questions answered in real time. So if that seems useful to you, or if you think there's somebody else who might find that useful, definitely be sure to invite them to our webinar. And as always, if you found this episode helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, share it with friends and family. That helps us get discovered and helps us help more people break free from debt and find joy. And one thing I want to leave you with, it's not shameful to ask for help. It's not shameful to do something to stop striving and break free from debt, whether that's settlement or whether it's something else. What would be a shame is to stay in debt forever, to keep struggling because you were too afraid to take the step to break free. I'm Ben. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Break Free. I'll see you again soon for another episode. And hey, let's build some financial joy together. Take care.